I'd like to welcome us now back, and we're going to move into some panel discussions. So the first one will be about technology transfer from academic startups. John, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is John Ritter. I'm the director of the Office of Technology Licensing at Princeton University, and it's my pleasure to be a moderator for our session on tech transfer and for academic startups. I'd like to get right into it and have our panelists introduce themselves, but briefly, we will have some Q&A followed by 10 minutes at the end for, we'll have the panel followed by 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. And if you post your questions in the Q&A section, I will pick some of those. Unfortunately, we probably won't be able to get to them all to have our panelists answer. With that, let me turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll get right into it.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to our session. My name is Almisha Campbell. I currently serve as the Assistant Vice President for Research and Economic Development at Jackson State University and the Director for Technology Transfer and Commercialization. I've been in the field for over 12 years. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Patrice Jean. I'm a partner at Hughes, Hubbard & Reed in New York City. It's a pleasure to be on this panel today. I started my career actually as a scientist at a HBCU at Xavier University of Louisiana. After that, I did my PhD at Princeton, and then I went on to law school at Columbia University. And I believe that I'm here on the panel today to help and give some insight about the legal aspects of starting starting a business and going into entrepreneurship from any intellectual property points of view.
Good afternoon. I'm Chad Womack. I'm the Senior Director for National STEM Programs and Initiatives at the UNCF. A proud graduate of Morehouse College and Morehouse School of Medicine. Like Dr. Jean, I'm a life scientist, spent quite a bit of my time at the bench, launched a biotech company, realized I didn't know what I was doing, and learned a lot in the private sector. I'm really happy to join this great panel to talk about the role of HBCUs as potential hubs and nodes for the innovation and tech ecosystem, some of the challenges and yet the opportunities that HBCUs face, and to deal with some of the opportunities to transform the research and development activities on HBCU campuses, including commercialization and entrepreneurship.
Thanks very much, everyone. That's a good segue, Chad, because I'd like to ask you if you could talk a little bit about the particular challenges that HBCUs face in becoming more involved in IP and entrepreneurship, given their historical mission.
Thank you, John, for the question. Of course, we could probably spend a whole day fleshing that out, but let me summarize it by saying and providing the historical context. So with the exception of a notable few, including my mother and father's alma mater, Cheyney State University, which was founded in 1837 as the Institute for Colored Youth in my home city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Most of our HBCUs were founded after the Civil War, primarily to solve a social problem, which was how do we integrate former slaves into American society. And I want to say outright and unequivocally that we should plant a flag of success. I think our schools have done just that. Our HBCUs are proud institutions, as they should be, for having served the mission of educating Black folks in this country and shining a bright light on the power of education and the impact that that has on social movement and mobility. However, over the decades, beginning of the 20th century to now, the economy has shifted from agrarian through industrial now to a highly tech economy. And the role that universities and higher ed research centers have played has shifted as well. The challenge that HBCUs have faced is while they've been very successful in their primary mission, they've been challenged and beset by institutional and structural issues racism included, in not receiving the same amount of attention and investment, federal investment, that undergirds the R&D activities across academic institutions in this country. HBCUs still lag behind on a per capita basis their predominantly white counterparts, and there are some structural barriers facing African American researchers, scientists, and engineers seeking support from NIH, NSF, DoD, et cetera, which has left holes and gaps in the infrastructure and capacity. So part of what we're trying to do, and I should pause and say my colleague Almisha Campbell is doing great work at Jackson State University, trying to mind the gaps, and she's doing a great job of it. But I think, we really do need to address those structural barriers and yet the opportunities for HBCUs to reap the benefits of federal R&D investment. And so we're hopeful that with new administration and a rethinking of the importance of HBCUs at the national level, that will result in more opportunities for scientists and engineers on our campuses to access funding, and also for our schools to begin to build capacity around intellectual property management, commercialization, and then of course entrepreneurship.
Thanks very much, Chad. Almisha, I want to throw it over to you. Maybe you can touch on some of the challenges as it pertains to you working at an HBCU, and also how you do tech transfer at a one-person shop, particularly when you wear all of those other hats that you wear at Jackson State.
Yes, that's a good question, John. And just to go off of what Chad said, he's right. The structural and institutional issues that sometimes can be a challenge, and it's no fault of any administration in particular. It's just the way it has been. Our mission, of course, is always teaching, and then we move on to talk about research. But now when you have the federal government is saying, they are funding and putting all this money out there for commercialization. So you have to follow that trend now to say, if we're doing this research and we're garnering this research dollars, then we have to look at the public good. How do we make sure that we're taking that investment in our research infrastructure and start thinking about technology management and commercialization? Because there's funding out there for it, but we have to have the structure and the capacity on our campuses to do that. In my experience, it had always been an issue with leadership sometimes, because they're not accustomed to this area and this field being a main focus in their leadership training about becoming a HBCU leader. It's not a part of that training at all for them to focus on that. So they focus on making sure they had good academic programs. They focus on ensuring that they have a research infrastructure in place, but not the other side that we are talking about here today. So as I've seen over the years, been here for almost 13 years, I've seen a shift now. I'm seeing now an understanding that we have to engage in innovation and entrepreneurship. What I have done in working along with different colleagues across the country is noticing that while we are focusing on tech transfer and commercialization, who is doing the training at the ground level? Who's doing the training on the ideation all the way up to, development and all of that stuff? And so we had to create programs here to ensure that we're teaching those basic skills, right? Because if you're asking me to send your startup to participate in a particular program, I'm going to ask you, where am I going to get them from? Because we have not done the early stages of implementing and getting the entrepreneurial mindset in place on the campuses yet. So a lot of work put in place with that, got funding from the National Science Foundation to the ICO-side program. So we've used that really to help us. And it's really helped us in the tech transfer space as well, because now we're able to get the data from the customer discovery and also looking at using that same data to send in folks off to national organizations to participate in different conferences and also getting them to start thinking about SBIR and STTR. So that's a long process. And as Chad know, we created the Enrich program so we can train these things to HBCUs across the country. And Chad is on the board of Enrich program. That's one of those grassroots things that we are doing to ensure that not only are we doing that at Jackson State, but we are doing it for other HBCUs because we see the need for that. We see that big gap in getting them, not just faculty, but also student, getting that entrepreneurial mindset in place, and for them to start thinking about commercialization and understanding how to do it, but also put a team of people in place that can support those efforts. I cannot say it has been easy being a one person's office, but I had to learn very hard. How do I start an application process so that I can cut down costs for the institution, so that the focus on the spending that I'm doing in the tech transfer office does not become a big thing, right? So cutting down costs, and when do I bring in an external party to assist with the operations? So I had to learn very, very fast. And I must say, I couldn't do it by myself, right? So I had to go out and seek, different partnership opportunities with folks like the Kentucky, University of Kentucky, Georgia Tech, different organizations that had something built into place, and seeing how can I tap into what you have to do the training on my campus. So it's just not a one person doing all of it by myself. I'm just the figurehead here, but my support is coming from different external partners that have been very gracious over the years in assisting in that process. So like I said, it's a one person face, but it's a whole machine behind getting us all of that support. And I would add, and I know I'm going a little long, but I would also add that over the last 4 years, the 4 tech transfer directors in the state of Mississippi, from Jackson State, University of Southern Mississippi, Ole Miss, and Mississippi State, we've had constant meetings. Sometimes we meet twice per week. So we're sharing best practices, we're sharing challenges, and we're trying to help find solutions for our various campuses. Because while I'm the only HBCU R2 institution in the state of Mississippi, a part of our research consortium, they have some challenges similar to mine. And so being able to have that group working together has been very helpful over the years.
Thanks, Almisha. All of that resonates with me because as I mentioned to you in one of our pregame sessions, back in 1996, Princeton was a 1 or 1.5 person office, and my reliance on the ecosystem to help me feel bigger and do more with the little resources I had. But it does take time, and Princeton's at a completely different place now. So I'm glad to hear that it sounds like you're also seeing some changes, and the future looks good for entrepreneurship at Jackson State. Patrice, let me change topics a little bit and ask you. Patents are what we think of first and foremost when we're talking about intellectual property, and certainly patents are, critically important to startups and to licensing if it's a direct transfer of the technology. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of patents, but also about the other forms of intellectual property and their potential importance to researchers and entrepreneurs?
Absolutely, it'd be my pleasure. And you're absolutely right. I think that when people start thinking about their IP transfer departments or their IP departments, patents certainly are the number one thing, especially on campuses where scientific inventions are important and scientific research is going on. But we always try to help and inform people that there are other forms of intellectual property that are very important and critical to the success of new companies. So for instance, when you're choosing the name of your company, that's going to be your brand. And ultimately any product or anything else that comes out of it. So thinking very carefully about your trademarks and your trademark strategy is extremely important. And as many of you might be able to relate to, there are some things, some drug products as well as items that have gone off patent many, many years ago, but they still have their brand, like Tylenol, for instance. Most people don't even refer to acetaminophen as acetaminophen sometimes, and they go to that brand name, or Benadryl, for diphenhydramine. So thinking about things like your brand are very important. I think people sort of underestimate it a little bit because they think of those patent rights that um, will help you to have a one-time monopoly on a particular area or sell for making, using, and selling a particular item. But trademarks you can have forever, as long as you prove to the United States Patent and Trademark Office that you're using that item for what you're saying that you're going to use it for forever. You just have to file proof every 10 years. Copyrights are extremely important. I think people don't use them enough. And copyright protection happens as soon as you make a replication of whatever document. So these are employee manuals, customer lists, computer programs. Many times in companies today, things are so animated, and a lot of people don't think about the fact that they can copyright their technology. And I guess the last thing that I'll touch upon is trade secrets, which has become more and more used today. It's extremely powerful form of intellectual property, as long as you do it correctly. And one of the most important parts of a trade secret is to make sure that you do whatever you need to do to keep that information confidential only to the people who need to know. Lots of times people think of it as the Coca-Cola secret recipe, but it can expand to other things like your mode of operation of doing something. So that's just something to think about as someone is helping you create your intellectual property portfolio moving forward, to make sure that you're doing all the right things, following all the steps that you need to follow in order to protect particular types of intellectual property.
Thanks, Patrice. Of course, trade secrets in academia are not as common because of the mission to publish or perish, but we do on limited occasions get into licensing non-exclusively know-how when it's appropriate. And I think it's important for entrepreneurs, for tech transfer offices, to work with a good patent attorney to help them navigate their way around how that should properly be done, especially in an academic environment where again, the mode is to publish.
That's absolutely right, but still don't discount it, because there are cell lines, for instance, and ways of managing cell lines that there are some labs who have kept as trade secret. So so it's just something to think about.
Definitely. Amisha, I want to throw it back to you and ask you how you make decisions. We always get asked all the time, how do well, people think, a place like Princeton has an unlimited budget for filing patents. It's just not true. We have to make decisions about which patents we will fully file because of the cost of filing patents. And I wonder how, from your perspective, how you make those decisions. Do you do it yourself? Do you have a committee? Or can you talk a little bit about how those very difficult decisions are made, particularly when faculty, as we all know, believe that when they disclose an invention, that it's the most important thing in the world, and that if you don't say yes, you're making a big mistake?
Yeah, very good question. And that last part, is the first thought came to my mind, because for every faculty, the comment is always, this is my life's work. I really believe in it. You ought to believe in it too. And sometimes it goes so far to come and say, I'm going to do a PowerPoint presentation to convince you why this is the best thing out there and why you should invest in this, right? My role, I often see that it's not only that I'm representing the university, I'm also representing the inventor. And the decisions have to be one that benefits both. In terms of, and then of course it has to be something that we can see the potential of it for public good. So ultimately is the public good would rise to the top, more so than the money sometimes that it costs to do it, or more so than the money that it brings in. What public good is this? We tried before to do an ad hoc, committee. And at a small institution, it doesn't work so well because even when you try to remove names and redact different things, they still figure out who it is that's working on, and they sometimes some biases that steps in and overrides the real public good that you're trying to get out of the decision making. So oftentimes that decision usually comes down to a good conversation between myself and the inventor. And for us to reach to that point of, once you've done all the patent landscape searches, once you've done the market assessment, once you've had them reach out to different people that they know, because they're more familiar with the technology than I am, and we bring some of those people to the table without disclosing proprietary nature of the intellectual property, we're able to now say, hey, this is where we are, and kind of make that decision together. So we haven't had, it's only in my career, it's only been one situation where I had a faculty who actually thought I didn't like him, and that's why I made a decision, despite the information that came back from the market assessment, despite me having him speaking to experts in the field. It came back to, I don't think you like me, and I think that's why you did it. This is my life's work. So what I did in that, and this was the first time I did that, I asked the VP for research for permission to assign that to the inventor and have him, file it on his own. And so once he filed and he started getting back the office action, then he quickly realized, yeah, this is not going to work, right? And so sometimes you have to let them make those mistakes, on their own.
Yeah, I mean, it's an imperfect process because the technologies coming out of academia are very early stage. And so that is one solution that we use as well. We will, under our policy, we have to offer to return the rights, subject to any federal strings that go along with it, to the inventor, should the university decide not to go forward with a patent filing. Chad, Amisha mentioned Enrich, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, and also accelerators and other ways that you and the UNCF are supporting innovation and entrepreneurship at HBCUs.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been a pleasure to serve as an advisor to Enrich. I think what Almisha is doing is great work that needs to be scaled, to other schools as well. The work I do at UNCF started actually back in 2012 when I sort of grandparented an idea and a project from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy called HBCU Startup and Innovation Initiative to UNCF. And I immediately partnered with the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, OSTP, the White House HBCU Initiative, and APLU, actually, Association of Public and Land Grant Universities, to talk about something called HBCU ICE, which stands for Innovation, Commercialization, Entrepreneurship. And the idea behind that was that our HBCUs were in a special category of institutions that had some challenges that were unique because of their historical origins and also the relationship between our campuses and federal agencies and the private sector. And so we began to convene a series of meetings and sessions, mostly informal, to talk about, well, what were those challenges and how could we solve those challenges, thinking outside the box, taking advantage, of course, of what predominantly white institutions have had to deal with. And I think Almisha made the point that all academic institutions struggle a bit with commercialization. So this is not necessarily unique just to HBCUs. But we recognize that some of the unique challenges that HBCUs faced required, I guess, some discussions that we would share best practices and lessons learned. That has culminated in quite a bit of activity among HBCU leadership around how we can develop strategies that would help our schools, one of which, and it's something that I'm particularly concerned about, and that is access to capital. We really can't talk about commercialization, tech transfer, and entrepreneurship without addressing the need for capital. And I think, John, you alluded to it. I mean, even Princeton with its ginormous endowment, you can't just, fund every provisional patent that you'd like, or faculty members would like, you have to maintain an office. So that's true for everyone. And I think it's interesting because when you look at the HBCU community, it's actually not just one community. You have public and land grant schools like Jackson State, for instance. And then you have the private institutions. And they're not all in the same boat. So there's some interesting differences between the two. But even on the entrepreneurial side, even if you prosecute a patent or license IP out of the university, most of our entrepreneurs within the community don't have bootstraps. So part of what we have to do is address the pre-seed to seed stage. And one of the things I'm thinking about with my colleagues at UNCF and other places is to establish what I call a bootstrap fund, which would serve as a donor advised fund and help African American entrepreneurs, particularly those who are launching companies or ventures from HBCUs, to have a source of capital that would allow them to get to the next step, whether it's a Series A or licensing to a larger company, what have you. Recognizing that we definitely need to address the capital side of the equation.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go back to Patrice, and maybe you can give us some insight on the different or some of the recent changes around software. We get a lot of invention disclosures that are software related. So they both, you talked about, the copyright aspect of software, but people are also interested in the potential of filing patents to get both forms of protection. But I know there's been some changes around in the law around that. And so I wonder if you could speak from a practitioner standpoint about some of those changes, as well as things like gene patenting and things like that.
Right. So where we are on the issue of patent eligibility is what we talk, how we refer to this. So things that are eligible to be patented. When our patent laws were originally created, well, actually, our original patent provisions are actually in the United States Constitution. So when our forefathers created this country, they knew that it was extremely important to have intellectual property rights available to the citizens of this country so that it would grow through innovation. Since then, they've revamped these laws based on the practice of patent law in the United States. And those laws have been interpreted by the Supreme Court of the United States. Within the last 10 years, there has been, it has been very fluid in terms of what things are patent eligible and what are not. And two of the things that the Supreme Court has said are not patent eligible are abstract ideas and things that are genetically identical to things that are found in nature, or things that are found in nature really across the board. So for people who practice in the biological sciences, especially, and in some cases, chemicals that are just isolated from nature, and DNA, which is sort of a chemical that's just isolated from nature, those things have been deemed as patent ineligible under the current law. So what has to happen is someone has to make some kind of man-made manipulation to those things in order for them to be considered as patent eligible in the life sciences area, meaning it has to be a cDNA. If you happen to be a scientist and you know what I'm talking about here, it has to be a cDNA. It has to be made or constructed from something that's found in nature, like a messenger RNA or mRNA. For the inventions that are in what we call the business method area, and most of these are computer programs. There's case law out there now that says that many of those inventions, if they're just simply an abstract idea or just simply a computer system doing something that a human would normally do but slower, those things are not patent eligible as well. So what a lot of people have been doing that have inventions in that area is been using copyright law in order to copyright the programming code for those particular inventions so that they have some protection from others around the world. And the same is also true for trade secrets. There are lots of algorithms and things of that nature that are incorporated into computer programs that people are now keeping as trade secrets.
And the nice thing about copyright, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is it exists from the moment you create something original and put it in a tangible medium, and it does not need to be perfected in any way unless you wanted to pursue
Unless you want to
litigation.
sue, that's correct. So if you want to sue, then you have to go through the formal process of getting an issued copyright registration number. But other than that, for copyrights, not trademarks and patents, you can immediately put a C in a circle around anything that is in some type of reproducible format.
Thanks very much. Amisha, one of the things I'm going to go back to you, and one of the things I've been asked since, it's going back almost 20 years, every time I go to a faculty meeting and get 5 minutes of their time to talk about tech transfer, invariably the question comes up about, whether innovation, patents, entrepreneurship is going to be considered for tenure, which of course is completely out of my area and any decision-making authority that I have, and it's usually a departmental decision. But I haven't seen any progress at Princeton on that front, at least that I'm aware of. But I'm curious as to whether that's being, I know it's being taken into account at other places because I've talked to colleagues, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how it is being considered, if at all, at your institution.
Okay, great question and very timely. About 2.5 years ago, Oregon State University received a funding from the National Science Foundation to do exactly that, look at how to create some sort of summit and also some key metrics around giving credit for innovation and entrepreneurship in the tenure and promotion process. I've been a part of that from very early on, having those dialogues, being a part of the summit, being a part of a number of presentations. And that has been a really successful process to date. And it was timely for Jackson State because we were working on our tenure and promotion update. And just because of where I sit, and at the time, my vice president of research was actively involved with, as associate provost with academic affairs, and they mentioned they were working on it. And I go, okay, let me strike while the iron is hot. So I took some of those metrics from the PTI Summit and said, what would work for Jackson State based on my knowledge of our faculty, based on my knowledge of our administrators here in the campus, what is most likely to be adopted? And so while I couldn't choose everything and all the metrics that were voted upon and during the summit, I was able to take a good number of them and get them implemented in our tenure and promotion process. Our former provost and current provost are very supportive of it. And so they were the ones who really led the effort in terms of speaking to the faculty. So while I was able to present to the president's cabinet about why we should be engaged in this process, I was able to talk to the provost one-on-one about it. So she met with the faculty senate. I didn't have to do that. That's a whole different ballgame, like you said, John, that we are non-academic, so we stay out of the academic house as much as we can. But they did that, had that conversation, and we were able to be a part of that process. In fact, and I'll try to put it in the chat when I look for it, but we just published a paper from the PTA, which is Promotion and Tenure and Innovation and Entrepreneurship, about why this is so important. And I often tell them, I said, if faculty are going to be engaged in innovation and entrepreneurship, going through the patenting process and all of this stuff, we ought to give them credit, because to me, it takes about, more time than actually sitting down and writing an article, right? And so I give the weight of a patent application and it getting approved, higher than I would give an article, but probably about the same for a peer-reviewed journal. And so I wanted to ensure that the faculty who are participating in this process get credit for it. And mainly when I see the junior faculty, they're highly engaged in innovation and entrepreneurship on our campus. And so I felt a really strong need to help in that process. And I'm glad that it's happening. I will encourage anyone who's representing an institution here, look up ptie.org, and they're still accepting members to be a part of the coalition. You can look at the document that was produced with the metrics and see how you can do that on your campus, because it's one of the best ways to incentivize our faculty and our students as well.
Thanks. Very interesting, Almisha. Patrice, throwing it back to you, we talked about publication. Almisha was just talking about it vis-a-vis, patenting and in the tenure and promotion. We talked about it, how we have to deal with that in terms of filing patents. But can you talk from a legal standpoint about the relationship between publication and patenting and any other form of intellectual property as well, if there is any relationship?
Right. For others, I mean, obviously copyright, when you write papers, it's immediately copyrighted, and most journals go through that copyright process for you. But what Almisha is doing through her organization, I think it's extremely important, because what a lot of people don't realize is that in most countries, and in the United States in particular, there's this 1-year window. So after you've made something public, you've really lost your right to go to the USPTO and say, I've found something that's novel and patentable, based on the present United States law. So it's really important to take a little bit of the sting off of not being able to publish sometimes, and allowing those inventors to be able to get credit for going through the patent application process, because it is very vigorous, quite frankly, from the point of view of science, as well as getting past the law and whatever prior art might be out there that some people might say, well, your invention is obvious based on what's already out there. So people just need to be aware and think about how they are publicizing anything that they intend to get patent rights to in the United States. And in some countries, there is a zero timeline. So as soon as you disclose in any form of fashion, then you're barred from getting patents in those jurisdictions. So, and a lot of those countries are in Europe, where if you're in the life sciences, or quite frankly in engineering areas, you might want to have protection in those countries at some point. So it's just something to think about, and really open dialogue with your IP transfer departments as you are thinking about publishing papers, or going through the patent process, and working on a plan or strategy to do that, so that you don't inadvertently give up your rights someplace, is extremely important.
And it doesn't even have to be an old-fashioned paper that appears in a journal. It could be an abstract that appears online, a month or 2 months before the presentation at a conference, right?
Things are very strict. It could be a conversation that you had with a colleague who is not an inventor on your patent. So, you have to be very careful about disclosures that you make about the work that you're doing.
Thank you very much. Chad, I want to go back to you. I want to ask you, what can schools like Princeton, how can we help you leverage the innovation and entrepreneurship at HBCUs? What kinds of things can we, I know that there's some things that are under discussion with Dean Priestley and others at here at Princeton, but I wonder from your perspective, what all we can do to help you.
Well, first, let me say thank you for the opportunity to share the stage for this conference. This is a wonderful example of the first step towards building partnerships and collaborations with HBCUs. So more of this, but even further, helping our HBCU tech transfer offices with best practices, lessons learned. We're actually in the process of, and I've been talking with Almisha and others, building a consortium of HBCU TTOs so that we can internally share our best practices. I think that's critical. But the third thing is access to capital, and I want to stress that. Part of the unfortunate legacy of slavery and racial oppression and injustice has been the economic disenfranchisement of the African American community. And that has a very direct and significant impact on our ability to fund startups, to really push intellectual property through the system. It's one thing to have pipes, but it's quite another thing to be able to actually push things through the pipes that have value in a commercial sense. So we struggle with that, and I think institutions like Princeton, could go a long way in supporting the best practices and accessing the capital among the venture capital community and angel investors that are connected to Princeton's ecosystem, for instance. Princeton as a tier 1 research intensive institution, I'm sure within your alumni networks have high net worth individuals who might be favorably disposed to support an angel network of investors who might support startups, for instance. Things like that, that I think would go a long way in sort of moving us to address the racial wealth gap, which right now is ginormous and growing. So I think there's wonderful opportunity. I think conversations like this today go a long way in kickstarting ideas, and hopefully we'll have more of this.
Well, we'll look forward to continuing the dialogue. We're getting near the end. We've got just a couple more minutes before we go over to the Q&A. And I think would like to ask Amisha one more question. I know when I go out and I give talks, the first thing everybody wants to know is how much money do you make? And because that's the sort of the sexy thing. And but it's not all about the money, what we do. And in fact, the vast majority of the technologies at Princeton and anywhere else really don't make as much, don't bring in as much money as they cost in terms of patent costs, for example. So I wonder if you could talk about the importance of education as part of the tech transfer process at Jackson State and your own personal feelings about it.
Yeah, very good question. You're absolutely right. A lot of people focus on, well, how much money did you make? How much did you spend protecting this intellectual property, and how much you make? So it's not just how much you make, but how much you spend. And if I don't have a tech transfer budget, for lack of a better term, I mooch off the VP of Research budget, which I love, because when they offered me a budget, I said no, because your budget is bigger than mine. I can just get from your budget. If you give me a budget, it might be very small and very limited. So I said absolutely no to my own budget, and I work with that budget. But one of the, and I said it earlier, what I push is public good, right? I push about the impact it makes on the community, economic development, because most of our technology that's coming out of Jackson State University that people don't know about is used by the military. Our unmanned aerial vehicles, our bulletproof, all sorts of different technology that we use, they're actually used by the military, because most of them were funded by DoD. And so, through our operations with them and our partnership, most of the technologies are there. And as you know, when we do that, oftentimes it's not about any money coming in to the institution, but we can definitely promote and say, this is what we contributed to the public good. So I tend to stay away from conversations about money, whether it's how much I spend versus how much I brought in, and work more on showing them the impact that it made within the community, the impact that is made on the academic career of our faculty and our students, what has transpired in terms of academic entrepreneurship, and more partnership opportunities that we were able to garner as a result of some of the technologies that we've developed and protected over a period of time. So that's where I put the value in and the value also in creating other programming, receiving additional funding and support for our activities on our campus, and how do we marry those things together so we have a broader impact. One day I'd love to say I have X amount of $1 million of endowment and this is what I was able to do with it, but at this time we don't have that.
Well, it takes time, I can
Yes.
tell you, and luck.
Yes.
So hang in there.
Yeah.
All right, we're at the question and answer section. We've got about 10 minutes, maybe a little bit less now. And I'm looking through the questions, and one of the questions I'll throw out to anybody who wants to take it on the panel is something I guess I talked a little bit about, or Chad answered, I threw it out there, but how can our tech transfer offices, like offices like mine, do more to provide services to the HBCUs and help them not only with best practices that Chad, you talked about, but with with other services in the invention disclosure, patenting, and entrepreneurship process.
I take a quick stab at this from my vantage point and the needs. It's a lot of it sometimes doesn't have to do with just giving us money. Of course, we always need money, but also the training, access to some of the resources, templates in your agreements that you've used over the time and know that these work, right? Because rather than having us start from scratch in developing, our agreements and et cetera, we could say, you can say, hey, we have this at our university. We had something before, it didn't work, and we had to make these changes to accommodate this process. Those are very helpful. Also helpful in for me, when I first got thrown into tech transfer, literally thrown into tech transfer, the first thing I do was try to identify a place on a campus that was friendly enough for me to visit and spend a week shadowing a tech transfer director. And I would always give credit to, that's where I went to FAMU, and Tanaga Boozer was gracious enough to allow me in her office for an entire week to be able to shadow from 8 to 5 and watch her process, watch how she engaged with faculty, with administrators. That's very helpful. Internship opportunities for students to intern in the tech transfer office at another institutions, because of course we have to build a pipeline of getting students into the field of tech transfer. It's a field that is not, there's not a lot of diversity in tech transfer field right now. And we want to make sure that we have more diversity. We want to see some of our students going off and becoming patent examiners and different things within the tech transfer field. So that's another way that that can be helpful. And then also partnering and grant writing opportunities when we're looking at grant funding to support some of these activities, whether it's entrepreneurship or commercialization training program, considering partnering with us. And one of the things I like to say, not look at us from a deficit model, not look at us at a perspective that you're coming in to save us, but more so I'm coming in to work alongside you and to, share and learn together. And that is always best received when it's coming from that perspective. And I know Chad may have some more concrete, other ways that he has been thinking about in terms of partnership.
Yeah, thank you, Almisha. And I think Almisha's comment about not coming in to try to save our institutions is a very important point, because it's not that we don't have value or not creating value. We are, but how, and from my perspective, how predominantly white institutions and HBCUs can partner is really around what I would call 1 + 1 = 3. How do you create even greater value through the partnership or collaboration that's shared in terms of equity? I'll leave it to the brilliant scientific lawyers like Dr. Jean to figure out who owns what. But at the end of the day, if you're creating value, if you're growing the pie of opportunity, if you will, then there should be an upside for everybody and an opportunity to share in the innovation and the impact of that innovation. There's some interesting I think areas where, whether you're talking about life sciences or engineering or even computer science, where majority institutions and HBCUs could work together, particularly as it relates to how the application of technology has impact on social justice. Excuse me. And I'll use one example, artificial intelligence, machine learning. We know that the current algorithms sometimes exclude African Americans and others. Maybe there are ways where computer science faculty members at HBCUs could partner and collaborate with their colleagues at majority institutions to come up with new algorithms that don't exclude folks who come from different communities. That's just one example. I can think of a few on the life sciences side. Lord knows the genomics and health informatics field is exploding. That's in a rich area for, I think, collaborations that could be fruitful. So I think in conclusion, I think, we need to have more of a symmetry, if you will, where our respective institutions can come together and work together to solve problems that are relevant to humanity, where everybody shares in equity and the upside.
Thanks, Chad.
I also think it might be worth exploring a little bit and trying to find more opportunities, not just to partner with majority institutions, academic institutions, but sometimes companies that may have similar objectives when it makes sense. It doesn't always make sense. But for instance, when I was doing my PhD at Princeton, part of my PhD was done down at Bristol Myers Squibb. Because of a relationship that they had where the professors were coming to teach the students and the graduate students were going down, a mile away to the Bristol Myers Squibb facility to do research. And then there were organic partnerships that sort of developed out of the research that the graduate students were doing on both campuses. And I think one thing that a lot of tech transfer offices don't really employ enough is just inviting people who are at law firms. They will come to your institutions for free to talk to either you or your scientists. And sometimes, I know we were talking about this a little bit before, Almisha, sometimes you say it and they don't believe it, and then you bring somebody in and then they believe it, and all of us will happily come to your institution and give a 30-minute, 50-minute talk. And, it's education. And you never know who's connected to who and can maybe, assist. Yeah.
Thanks, Patrice. I think we have time for maybe one more question, and I'll see if I can frame it in a way a little bit differently than what was posed in the Q&A. But can you talk, Patrice, about the differences between authorship on a copyright, for example, as compared to inventorship on a patent, and what the ramifications would be if the inventorship was not correct, especially if it was done in an intentional, incorrect way?
Yes. Well, under our patent laws, if an inventorship entity is not correct on a patent, then the patent is invalid. So it is very important. I mean, and it is possible that when a patent application was applied for, the inventorship was correct. But then when the patents issue, the claims actually issue, once it's gone through the vetting process, that maybe the invention is much more limited than what the original inventive entity thought the invention was going to be. So then the invention may need to be changed. The inventive entity may need to be changed, meaning who's listed as inventor, depending on what claims come out. And I've been a part of a lot of very contentious litigations where someone believes because, for instance, they were listed as one of the authors on an article, that they should be an inventor on a patent, and that is not always the case. There are very strict rules as to who is eligible to be an inventor. So that's kind of the basic thing of that. Authorship for copyrights, meaning who painted the painting, who is listed as an author of the article. All of those things are ruled by the copyright laws. Trademarks, it's whoever is using the trademark in commerce. And for other intellectual property, there are various other rules, but I just think people need to understand, and it's often good to have a conversation with an intellectual property professional as to who should be listed as an inventor on a patent.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I like most about patents is whether you're a student, that is, whether you're even an undergraduate or a graduate student, or you're a professor, and if you have contributed intellectually under the patent law, you are as much an inventor as the preeminent faculty member researcher. So it's a question that often gets asked, and we tell them exactly the same thing, and that usually gets them to the point where we need to be on that.
But by the way, just one quick thing,
Sure.
by the way, that also it has other implications too, because under the United States patent laws, everyone has the right to license that patent without regard to the other ones. So that's why it's so important to make sure that assignments are in place so that all of the rights go to your company if it's a startup company, because there have been lots of fights that have taken place because under our laws, if you've got inventor A, B, and C, if C wants to license it to some company, A can license it to somebody else unless you've correctly assigned those rights to the company. So
Great
you have to be
point.
careful.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think we're at the end of our time. It went by, as we discussed in the pregame, very, very quickly. I'd like to thank everybody, thank our panelists for their insight and participation, and certainly thank our audience for being a part of our presentation. And I think that is it. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to throw it to the next panel or what, but that about covers our end of it. And we'll see you at the next panel.